scripture reading is from Genesis 32, verse 22 to 32. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed the Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. This is the word of God.
Well, this summer, we have been walking through a series called Adult Sunday School. We're revisiting the stories many of us first heard as children, the ones with the flannel graph pictures and the coloring pages, and asking a simple question: What do these stories actually mean for us now as adults? A few weeks ago, we looked at splitting of the Red Sea, then Noah's Ark, and today we look at another story many of us know well: Jacob wrestling with God all night by a river. Maybe you even drew a picture of it once: 2 figures locked together in the dark until sunrise, which makes for a dramatic image, like a Star Wars scene. But like Noah's Ark, this story isn't just a picture on a page. It is about you and me, and about a question God is still asking today. But first, let's start somewhere ordinary. Have you ever seen a child bring a broken toy to a parent and say, "Well, it's broken," as if the toy simply broke itself out of the blue without the interference of the child? Or a student who is late for a class and blames the traffic, or someone who did not finish a project and blames the printer or the dog with his project. Well, we are all expert at this, because it is very hard for us to say, "I did this," or "I did not do this," like the project. I didn't do the project. It's much easier to blame someone else: our parents, our church, our past, our school, our friends, or even God. And here is the truth: we all carry marks from our past, real wounds and real pain. And when we remember them, they still hurt. And I wanted to be clear about this here. First, I'm not saying that those wounds are not real. And I'm not saying that you are to blame for everything that happened to you. Some of what marked you truly was done to you, not by you. And God takes that pain seriously. But here is the danger. If we only ever see ourselves as victims of rejection, of being let down, of being hurt by people who should have protected us, we risk losing something precious. And that is the chance to grow, and the chance to grow to know God more deeply. And when we stay stuck there, we stay like children who never grow up. And we never step into a mature life that God has called us to live. A mentor of mine put in this way: our spiritual and emotional growth starts when we stop blaming others for who we are. That is not a harsh word. It is actually a hopeful one, because it means that healing is possible, and it starts with something surprisingly simple: telling the truth about ourselves, telling the truth to ourselves and to God. And this is exactly what happened in the story of Jacob. But before we get to the passage that we read this morning, I want you to know who Jacob is. So I want to give you a little bit of background of him, a bit of his biography, a little bit of his story. So when we get to the text that we read this morning, you already know what is going on there, and it will help us to understand better what we read this morning. So bear with me as I go back and explain who Jacob is, okay? So we have to go back all the way to Genesis chapter 25. And Jacob is born holding on to the heel of his twin brother called Esau, who was just born moments before him, which is actually where his name comes from. Jacob means he grasped the heel. And in Hebrew, it also carries a sense of he deceives or he cheats. Even his name told the truth about who he would become. And in the Old Testament, most of the characters in the Old Testament, their names are attached to their personality of who they are. So one day Esau come home from hunting, starving, while Jacob was cooking a stew, and Jacob said, and so Esau wants to eat. And Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright," which is the special right and honor that belong to the firstborn son. And Esau, thinking only on his empty stomach, agreed, and Jacob got exactly what he wanted through a clever trick, not through honesty. Later on, Jacob went even further. His father Isaac was old and could not longer see well, so with the help of his mom, Jacob dressed up like his brother and lied to his father's face, stealing the blessing that was meant for Esau, the oldest. And when Esau discovered the trick, he was so angry that he wants to kill Jacob. So Jacob had to run for his life. And Jacob fled toward the land of his uncle Laban. So he goes to another land. And on the way to his uncle Laban, God met him in a dream in a place called Bethel. And Jacob saw a stairway reaching from earth to heaven, with angels going up and down, and God standing above, saying, "I will bless you. I will be with you." It is a beautiful, unconditional promise, like the one that we saw last week with Noah. But notice how Jacob responds when he wakes up in chapter 28, when you read that chapter later on. "If God will be with me, then the Lord will be my God." You hear the deal making here. If, then. God had already promised to bless him, no string attached. And yet, Jacob still tries to negotiate with God. The same way that he negotiated with his hungry brother, and the same way that he tricked his blind father. It seems that old habits are hard to leave behind with Jacob. Now, Jacob arrives finally at Laban's house, and for once, he gets tricked himself. He falls in love with Rachel, Laban's daughter, and works 7 years to marry her. But on the wedding night, Laban switches her for her other sister, Leah, and Jacob has to work another 7 years for the wife he actually wanted, Rachel. Still, Jacob is Jacob. He later strikes a shrewd deal with Laban over sheep and goats and ends up wealthier than anyone in the land. Eventually, Laban's sons, his cousin, Jacob's cousin, grow so jealous of him that they want to kill Jacob because he became so rich. So Jacob has to run again. This time, there's no place to go except going back home. And going back home means that he is going straight toward Esau, the brother who wants to kill him. So if he stays, his cousin wants to kill him. If he goes back home, his brother wants to kill him. What to do? He decides to go home anyways. So that is where we find Jacob today in this passage that we read. After all this whole background, he has sent his family ahead across the river, and now he is alone in the dark, waiting to face the brother he wronged 20 years earlier. And a man comes and wrestles with him all night long. And readers of the story and scholars across many centuries have concluded that this man is God himself appearing to Jacob in human form. And Jacob is strong. The man cannot overpower him. So he touches Jacob's hip and knocks it out of joint. And this is not a random point of attack. In that one touch, God does not simply wound Jacob's body. He disabled the one thing Jacob has always trusted instead of God, which is his own strength. And yet, even wounded, even stripped of his self-reliance, Jacob will not let go. And as the sun begins to rise, the man says, "Let me go. I need to go." And Jacob answers, "I will not let you go until you bless me, unless you bless me." Think about that. Jacob has nothing left, no schemes, no strength, no leverage, and he's still holding on with everything that he has. And then the man asks him a question. And the question that he asks is not, "Where do you live?" or "What do you do?" But he asks, "What is your name?" This is not a question about information, because God already knows who Jacob is, or his name. This is a question about honesty. Jacob has spent his whole life running from the truth about himself, hiding behind schemes, lies, deals, and disguise. And as Bruce Walke, which was a scholar and used to be a member of this church, I mentioned him quite a lot last week, described him bluntly in his commentary. Jacob was a man who has done nothing but bargain, lie, and steal to get God's blessing. And this is a hard sentence to hear about anyone. And yet, it was Jacob's whole life story. Now wounded, out of tricks, he finally has to answer honestly, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he says. "My name is Jacob," which means he's acknowledging, "I am the deceiver. I'm the one who cheated my brother twice, the one who lied to his own father, and the one who is still, even now, trying to strike deals with God instead of simply trust him. That's me. This is who I am. Jacob." Now imagine God asking you the same question today. What is your name? Not the name on your ID card, but who are you really? For some of us, that is a frightening question. Because looking honestly at our life also means looking at our wounds. Maybe you grew up in a home where you never felt good enough. Or people expected things from you that you could never quite reach the expectation. Or you carried the weight of someone, or you carried the weight of something someone did to you in the past. Unkindness, exclusion, or even worse things. And those wounds are real, and they're not small. And looking at them honestly takes courage. Some of us wish God would simply hand us a shield or something to cover our past completely, so we never had to look back again. But that is not how God works. God does not erase your story. He redeems it. Meaning, He takes what was broken and makes something good and whole out of it. And redemption always begins the same way it began for Jacob, with honesty. Not performing, not pretending, just telling God the truth about who you are. Tell him. Tell him, God, I'm secure. God, I'm angry and I don't fully know why. God, I feel rejected. God, I'm tired of pretending, have it all together. Tell him your name. I am Jacob. I am Filipe. I am. We spend so much energy pretending to be strong, capable, easygoing, fine, having a face for others, because that is what we think people expect of us. And it is exhausting to keep performing a version of yourself that isn't real. But here's the good news hidden inside this old story. It is not other people who get the final word on who you are. And it isn't even your past that gets the final word. Listen to this. God is the one who tells who you are. And the road into that new identity begins exactly where Jacob's did, with honesty offered to God in the dark. Look what happened next in verse 28 of the chapter we read this morning. God gives Jacob a new name, Israel. And from that point on, Jacob is not remembered only as the deceiver. He carries a new identity, an identity that points towards maturity, identity that points toward a God covenant, towards God's faithfulness rather his own scheming. A covenant between God and Jacob, a new name marked by a new relationship built on that promise instead of his own cleverness. And this is what happened when you let God define who you are. Instead of let your wounds and your failures define you, actually it doesn't erase the pain of the past. But it means that the past no longer gets the final word in your life. And if you keep reading the Bible, later in the Bible, the prophet Isaiah speaks to Jacob's descendants and says, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. You are mine. You are precious and honored in my sight. I love you." And that promise was not only for Israel thousands of years ago. It is for anyone like Jacob who comes honestly before God. And I want you to notice one more detail here in this story. Jacob leaves that encounter limping. He walks away physically weaker than when he arrived. And yet he walks away spiritually stronger than he has ever been in his life. Centuries later, much later, the Apostle Paul discovered the same paradox, and he wrote, "When I'm weak, then I'm strong." In God's story, strength rarely looks like the strength the world admires. Sometimes it looks like a leaping man who finally told the truth about himself. And here is my invitation to you today. Whatever name you have been carrying, whatever name people have given you, deceiver, you're a failure, rejected, not enough, damaged, coward, bring it honestly to God. Let him ask you the same question he asked Jacob. What is your name? Meaning, who are you? And answer truthfully. Not to shame yourself, but because that honesty is the doorway into something new in your life. Because on the other side of that honest answer is a God who does not define you by your worst moment or nor define you by the deepest wound that you carry. He calls you his own, and he says, you are not the label you have carried for years. You are not what happened to you in the past. You are not even what people say about you today. You are a beloved child of God, precious in his sight, redeemed and renamed by the finished work of Jesus Christ. Do you want to know God more deeply? Then let God know you fully, honestly, without disguise. Tell him your name and listen closely, because he's ready to give you a new one. What is your name?